So the ANC Northwest Interim Provincial Committee, IPC, says the former chairperson, Mahumapelo, is still suspended for 5 years. The IPC has accused ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule of deliberately misinterpreting the ANC's constitution. It further says that Magashule has not sent the alleged appeal letter to the committee. The IPC says Magashule has no authority over the National Executive Committee to lift the suspension and say Mahumapelo's membership is still intact. So let's now discuss this. We are joined by political analyst Sanusha Naidu. Good afternoon to you and welcome.
Good afternoon, Colin, and thank you for having me, and good afternoon to your viewers.
Yeah, it looks like it doesn't rain, but it pours for the ANC now. So let's look at from the perspective of consequence management. This could be one of the most challenging eras for the ANC when it comes to dealing with its own. So let's start with this one. Mahumapelo gets suspended just before the deadline of the step aside. Is this a question of these are the smalls and the bigs are still coming?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that he's a small player in this whole theater that we are seeing unfolding or has unfolded with the step aside rule. I think he's very much an actor. I think he got marginalized at NASREC and therefore he's come back now. He was vindicated with the court ruling regarding the PEC rather, and the whole question around the legitimacy of the provincial executive conference and so forth. But I think it's also important to bear in mind is that he's a name that doesn't necessarily mean that he's a casualty of a message being sent to the rest of the bigger actors. And in this case, I think we are referring to Ace Magashule in a way that this is a message for you, that we are not going to be allowing anyone to deter and detract and completely destabilize the processes around the step aside rule. Unfortunately, the confusion around the implementation of this rule, and just listening to the tail end of the spokesperson's interview with your colleagues now, I think the problem we are having and the problem that exists here is that there's too many different interpretations that essentially contradict each other about this rule. Now, with the Secretary General being able to say, well, I want to basically, I have the power to essentially say to the former premier of the Northwest that you don't necessarily have to worry about this rule, about the suspension. I can lift it. Gives you an indication, Colin, that this idea of having this kind of interpretation that is completely contradicting itself, and I think it's coming to a point where confusion that just does not reign in this whole process. It's about the fact that by having this kind of lost in translation interpretation of the rule means that you can create these different avenues of uncertainty. And so everybody now is sitting here and thinking, when does the rule apply? I found it very curious listening to the spokesperson and what he was saying, that this is about taking everybody along and making it more clear and having more clarity and more coherence around the rule. If anything, I've seen lack of coherence. I've seen more confusion. I've seen less clarity around the issues. And I think to a large extent, it's causing this kind of rule to become completely unstable, unraveling the party in different ways. So, was the decision to suspend the former Northwest Province Premier, was that a message to be sent to the big wigs and the bigger people and players in the party around the step aside rule and who has allegations or criminal charges hanging over their head particularly? I think it was more than that. It was about saying that, Ace Magashule, we are coming. But I think he's also an actor. The former premier of the Northwest is an actor. And again, we are going to see more confusion reign around this. And I think there's too many kinds of different interpretations that are coming around the actual content and the actual rules around this.
Okay, so we have not seen any precipitation of anybody in the ANC indicating way ahead of time that they were willing to step aside before today. So talk to us about the political tactics that those who have been implicated, allegedly so, are using to survive and stay afloat. So do you think that they will be able to stay above the water when they are looking like they're skating on thin ice? For example, Ace Magashule said that he would like to consider the ANC elders like Thabo Mbeki and the likes. On the other hand, Supra Mahumapelo goes around saying that he's going to consult the branches of the ANC. Is this going to now, as you have seen the agitation of the interim provincial committee of the ANC in the Northwest, saying that if he continues to behave that way, then more charges will be added. What do you make out of that?
It comes back to the point, Colin, that I've been making, and that is the confusion. Where do the lines of accountability lie? Who has the final say? The NEC is taking Ace Magashule to task for lifting that suspension, saying you don't have that ability to do that. The consultation, I don't understand the rule of consulting or the idea that we give you 30 days to consult particular structures in the party. In the case of Ace Magashule, former presidents of the party. I find it very, I'm bemused by the fact that Ace Magashule can go and consult with former President Thabo Mbeki. I think that's just a recipe for disaster. I could never saw that happening, and I don't see it happening, but I could be horribly wrong in this context. But I think it's that kind of continuously giving the benefit of the doubt in this process and completely convoluting what is a very clear and coherent resolution, but continuously putting and adding the kind of content to it that contradicts itself in the process. And I find that to be completely out of kilter with what the actual resolution is about. And the idea that you can take these people along and strengthen the organization through a consultative process means that you're just kicking the can down the road of what is an inevitable process that needs to be had. You need to put your money where your mouth is. You need to take it as a decisive action. And that's not what's not happening. So the idea that you have that people are going to use it as a way to keep staying afloat in the party, I think you're quite right. You're spot on there in a sense, because it is about how do we use and manipulate this process by never going to the actual implementation and the actions that underpin this process in terms of stepping aside. But it's always about this idea of consultative. Sometimes you just need to stop consulting and just take action. And I would say that it will be a better way to do this. I think that the idea of theoretically being seen to be doing something versus the practicality of it is something that I can't understand why we are still grappling with this issue. If you really believed in this rule, you would apply it. I think the idea that you're allowing these individuals to continuously shift the goalposts, or the party in itself is not sure where the goalposts are on this rule, makes it even more uncertain. And I think we're going to end up continuously having this conversation, continuously talking about, are they going to step aside? Will they step aside? Who's going to step aside? Is it the foot soldiers that are going to step aside, and the bigger wigs are not going to get away with it? We can't keep having the same conversation, unfortunately.
One can make out of your statement that when you say sometimes you need to stop consulting and take action. And when we borrowed the words of Pule Mabe in the interview that he's had with Natasha Ntebo, he used the words the moral kite. Is the ANC carefully navigating this process so that it can make the situation not to be as volatile as it could be in terms of those implicated then becoming rebellious within the organization? And on the other hand, when you look at the way the situation plays out, when you talk about stopping to consult, why from the onset the ANC did not just say, we have the names of people who have been implicated in alleged corruption. These are the people, number one, number two, and up to number whatever. These people must step aside. Unlike making an announcement and say, those who have been implicated in corruption, step aside because we decided so in Nasrec, but they have not been named, but they know themselves.
Yeah, let's take the first point you raised. The first point is very interesting. Why can't you, are you using, let me put it to you this way, and in a more kind of broader context, the idea of constantly using the moral high ground as a foundation for what you want to achieve, particularly along the lines of saying there's a moral kite, and this is how we're going to do this, and it's going to be all done through appealing to people's moral consciousness. I think it hasn't worked, and we have to be really, very honest about that. Honest appraisal of the moral authority, the moral high ground, and the moral foundation has not worked. People don't see anything wrong in what they are doing. They don't actually believe that there's an immoral behavior that has set in, and so forth. I think this then leads to a second point, and that is, why don't you just take decisive action and say, right, you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, however the list is, and we are going to say to you, you need to go and step aside. Unfortunately, the wound has festered so badly that to take that kind of action now is actually quite detrimental. People have not done the right thing. People won't do the right thing because they've been always in this belligerent, aggressive process. They've always been a fight back, a pushback. And so that has been the norm. And that has been the context in which they've been behaving in the party, around factionalism, around battlegrounds, around contested power structures, around particular provincial structures, who's in a Premier League, who's not in a Premier League, how the party has actually devolved at the grassroots. All of these things, if you take the provincial structures and so forth, all of these things have become to a point of how selfish interests have ruled in the party and reigned in the party. And so when you're asking people to do this, it's going to be very difficult because you've never been you never had that decisive action. It's always been that kind of process. And I think, if we were sitting in the room right now with the spokesperson and other senior members of the ANC, they'll probably say to me, Sanusha, you don't get the ANC. This is not how we behave. This is not how our processes operate. We are always about consultation and consultative processes. I think a point to bring up is what the president said at the State Capture Commission over the last 2 days, and the constant reference to the fact that this party is dealing with things that other parties also deal with. He talked about herd mentality. And I think to a large extent, you've got these different dynamics that are basically unfolding and reaching a kind of very unresolved center and so forth. But at the end of the day, I think that when you are in such a predicament and you're in such a crisis, the question is, where is the center of authority in the party? Who has that ultimate say in leveraging the political power and saying to those individuals, there's a carrot and stick rule here. How do you apply those two spaces? How do you make sure that people you say to those that have brought the party into disrepute and created a reputational brand, a negative reputational brand image? How do you say to those individuals, you got to go because there's a stick here? Unfortunately, we know that this has been an ongoing challenge for the party, an ongoing difficulty in getting those individuals to do the right thing and remove themselves and say, I go, without any hesitation. But we also know that it hasn't been an easy task because, again, there's challenges around the fragmentation of power. And so forth. At the same time, I think in the communities, at the grassroots, in terms of what's happening, people are very aware of who are the errant leaders, what are the allegations, the whole question of criminal charges that are hanging over particular provincial leaders, local leaders in local structures, and we do know that there's some of the lists that have been done in terms of the lists that have been sent to, in terms of the step aside rule, in terms of the provinces sending lists to Lutuli House and to the Secretary General's office, and we know that those lists have been compiled. Now, we can't keep arguing that the moral authority needs to prevail, because at this point in time, it doesn't seem to be prevailing. And I'm not sure where this moral kite is flying, because I think when you keep trying to draw these analogies of a moral kite and this and that, you end up basically just, creating a self-defeating purpose. And so I would strongly say that, at this point in time, as you and I sit here, I'm frustrated, and I'm sure there are many other South Africans who, if you speak to, may express similar sentiment about the fact that they keep taking us to this point to think, oh, we're going to do this, and then suddenly we end up in a situation where there's not much that's done. So it's much ado about nothing at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. So now, just before you go, I want us to wrap it this way. Does it mean that those who have been eating with the implicated and the accused are finding it difficult to protest for them to show support. Drawing from the example of what happened in the Free State when one ANC official was driving around with a loud hailer trying to call members of the community to lobby for Ace Magashule to be supported, saying hands off Ace Magashule. And in Limpopo as well, there was this circulating recorded conversation of Fikile Mbalula calling out this taxi owner to say that he's labeling taxis of heads of Ace Magashule, and he said that bring that taxi here, Uzobona. So those kind of things, what does it say when it comes to these people who have been implicated? Is the question of they are now on their own?
Well, I think firstly, they've always been a kind of group that loosely came together, and they've always saw themselves as a faction in the party that needed to fight and retain their space. So we shouldn't be surprised by these kinds of tactics and these kinds of actions, because they've always remained that kind of grouping that, didn't necessarily always follow what the rules of the NEC or the decisions of the NEC had basically said. But having said that, I think that they will always remain a group that will feel that they need to push the envelope, that they will constantly buck the trend. They will challenge the narrative. They will challenge the decisions. They will challenge everything, and they've always remained that way. And I don't think that this rule in itself has created this process. They've always been these different kinds of pushback factors, pushback action and behavior against the trend, against what the decision has been. And I think we shouldn't be surprised by it, because it's always been there. Are they on their own? I think they band together in different ways. They come together in different ways. They draw support from each other in different ways, because they genuinely believe, whether rightly or wrongly, and I think we have to have that debate as well, that they are basically fighting for their survival in the party. And it's a very, very contested survival, and it's based on vested interests. And so they're not willing to give it up, and they won't give it up, and they will continuously battleground in the various ways in terms of how they're going to do it. I think this is why I was making the point earlier that with a rule like this, you've got to be very clear of what decisive action you're going to take. You can't keep changing the goalposts and changing the framework and keep having the rules. And I found it curious as well that the spokesperson was saying that we need to educate people about the rule and what the rule means. I think by now everybody should know what the long and short of that rule is, and should be familiar with what it means.
Yeah, I had only two words from your answer there: decisive action. And that's where we're going to leave it at. Thank you so much for making time to give us this analytical perspective on the ANC step-aside resolution, and have a good weekend.
Same to you, and thank you so much.
Yes.